Welcome to the Ayurveda for Women's Health podcast, where we simplify ancient Ayurvedic wisdom into practical guidance for everyday life. Between the overwhelming wellness trends, quick fixes, and conflicting health advice out there, we return to a science that has been around for thousands of years. I'm Rita, an Ayurvedic health counselor.
And I'm Brittni, an Ayurveda practitioner. In a world that disconnects us from our bodies, we are here to guide you back. Through body literacy, practical tools, and time-tested science, we will help you step boldly into a more empowered, aligned version of yourself. So let's dive in. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Views expressed do not represent our employers.
We went on some really wonderful tangents there. But, are you okay if I bring us back?
Yeah, bring us back.
Okay. Ovulation happened. That's where we left off, right?
Yes.
Ovulation happened. The egg has been released if ovulation happened. And so now we're moving into the luteal phase. So the luteal phase is really post-ovulation up through your next menstruation, up through your next bleed. And in Ayurveda, we think of the luteal phase as Pitta season. Pitta is the energetics of fire and water. And seasonally, we think of the luteal phase as our summer. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that quite literally our temperatures are elevated during this phase. Our basal body temperature increases during the luteal phase. So we're hotter. And if you are somebody who has more heat naturally in your constitution, or in Ayurveda, we'd say you have more of a Pitta constitution, you're likely going to feel that heat even a bit more. And you may notice some subtle heat symptoms, like a little redness in the face, or maybe a little bit more heat mentally, like a little tinge of irritability. We'll circle back to that because I actually have a lot of thoughts on that when it comes to the luteal phase. But essentially, this shift is happening where we had in the follicular phase all this building, and we had this estrogen, and we had this juiciness, and we had our prefrontal cortex at its best from like a cognitive standpoint, and we're most protected in exercise, and all that was happening in our follicular phase that's leading up to ovulation. And then we go into the luteal phase, and our estrogen has dipped and our progesterone is peaking, but with that loss of estrogen, we're really seeing a decline in the juiciness. So we don't have as much of that shine maybe to our skin and our eyes and our hair. And then also cognitively, it can just feel like a harder time of the month because we're no longer wired in that way from a neurotransmitter standpoint, that we have that boost in verbal fluency and problem solving. Those areas can feel a little less great. I'm not going to say that, if you're really stumbling and really finding some challenges in that phase, then we might be talking more of some imbalanced things to look at. But in general, we're not going to feel at our strongest from a cognitive mental standpoint. I will say one thing that I think is worth mentioning is that where progesterone is higher, you could make the argument that we are wired more for revising and editing. And I'd say in general, a good word might be discernment during this phase of the cycle. And it's kind of interesting. I've heard some people explain that from a threat detection standpoint. Like, again, if we're thinking of it from an evolutionary perspective, and during the luteal phase, we're trying to protect if pregnancy happens. We're trying to stabilize and keep the endometrial lining stable from like a micro level perspective. But in general, we're trying to protect a pregnancy if it happens. So it makes sense where our discernment is higher and we're therefore in this place of higher threat detection. But what I have found is I think that when progesterone's higher and estrogen's lower and we're in this summer phase, it creates a situation where it's easier to maybe see what's not working in your life. I've had this come up as a theme in so many clients I've worked with and that workshop that I mentioned, where because there's this elevated pitta, there's this elevated heat, we're more prone to experience some of that irritability, right? We're more prone to experience being a bit more sharp, let's say, with loved ones or just in general. And I think that it's always this balance of recognizing, well, yeah, I'm in my luteal phase. I don't have that juicy estrogen going like it's natural. I'm going to feel a little bit more sharpness. But I also think we want to remember that there's such intelligence to emotions. And so when we have that sharpness or that anger that comes up in the luteal phase, so often I think it's, okay, I'm really seeing what's not working in my life. Like I'm seeing what needs to shift in my relationship. I'm seeing what needs to shift in my work schedule. Like I do think it's important that we're looking at, is this some normal irritability? Is this like a deeper imbalance? And also like, what is the true emotion there? So, I think the luteal phase is probably worth some deeper conversation because I think it's where a lot of women run into issues. And that's especially true, again, if you happen to be somebody who has more heat in your constitution, because we think of that as like the hot phase of the cycle.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, I'm really glad you explained that because that was really helpful for me in understanding what you're describing in terms of that threat detection and like just kind of self-protection.
Mm,
And it also sounds like that inner clarity
mm,
is more present, which we also receive that with pitta, with fire. Like we have this inner awareness and perception and clarity that's just easier at that time because that element is stronger and more dominant at that phase. So it's really interesting how you described that. I really think that helped me understand that further, which I appreciate. So um yeah, that's really interesting. I think to the other point that we were talking about before, offline, before the podcast, in terms of that is as you're describing feeling more, irritability and sensitive, right? And we know Pitta's the sensitive dosha, like we've talked about in the past, can feel something quite easily or feel strongly about something quite easily. Also, at that time, this is, pre-menstruation. Essentially, you're opening up channels in your body to bleed.
mm,
So energetically, you're becoming more porous, like you're becoming more exposed and vulnerable. And when we're in this place of vulnerability, we can be more sensitive because just as you're saying, we're trying to protect ourselves. And so it is this like natural state of self-protection. Even just subconsciously, the body knows, the mind might not understand what's happening. But the body knows I'm more exposed right now and I might have an egg that I'm protecting. And so it's really fascinating actually to like hear, like to talk about this with you because it's connecting a lot of dots for me in hearing your explanation and description and then like hearing um how I've resonated with or thought about it at that phase too. So really, really cool, really fascinating. And especially from this like summer standpoint too, right? And understanding pitta and that inflammation, progesterone, the way that estrogen is juicy and cooling, progesterone is drying and heating. And so just as you explained, Rita, like we're losing that juiciness, but we're also having this increase of heat, inflammation, dryness. And what that can create if it's in excess is restriction, right? We lose that natural flow of water and hydration. We can be more susceptible to restriction or constriction, right? If you're thinking about imbalances you might experience, it could just kind of set us over the edge for some things that we might only experience at that time of the month. Like migraines, for example, right? That's something that can be a very common symptom to have migraines right before menstruation. And this can be part of that is the channels are tightened, right? They're not flowing as easily.
yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that you explained that way. I think that's a really good way to put it. I'm curious. So, where we're talking about where we're now in this heat phase, how would you explain how we want to maybe think about exercise and It totally makes sense when we're in that follicular, like cool, juicy, we can push it, we can do the high intensity, we can hike the longer distances or run the longer distances. What are your thoughts when we're moving into luteal phase?
Yeah, I mean, in this phase, you're really thinking like low and slow. So I would say more follicular phase is going to be more like high intensity, short bursts. Uh, Now we're in the endurance phase. Like
Mm.
luteal phase is endurance phase, but thinking more hiking as opposed to running or like toning it down a little bit. Like you're not going for your A game workout in uh in the luteal phase, right? You're really like slowing down. And I think we can think about this in a couple different ways. One, we already talked about the inflammation, where the body is already inflamed naturally with what's going on. It's going to be harder to recover. So especially if you're strength training in this phase, it's going to be very depleting to the body. You can do something light, maybe something gentle, but maybe more of a focus on like mobility and stretching and yoga, something that's not intense and activating and that you need a lot of recovery from. Because if we're thinking about inflammation, you're just like adding excess inflammation to the body already having it naturally as part of recovery. And then the other piece of that, going back to the carb piece, nutrition, is we're used like carbs are needed, carbohydrates are needed to build the uterine lining.
Mm.
So we need more carbs. That also means we have less carbs available for high intensity workouts. So it's the opposite of what's happening in the follicular phase because of this shift in hormones, the hormones that are present and what the body needs at that time. So that becomes very important in terms of nutrition, but also like how we're managing taking in that nutrition, right? Like the timing of that. That's helpful to work with someone to kind of fine tune those details. But thinking about carbs in this way, I think is very fascinating. It's not just like, oh, I'm getting fuel or I'm counting calories. We're thinking about how the body's actually using that specific type of fuel, and it's building the uterine lining, which is just fascinating. So that's something I would think about from like an energy availability standpoint is to like consciously, okay, I'm going to like increase my carbs a little bit. And like that can look different for each person of what that quantity or what that amount is. And the other thing I'll say in terms of exercise is that our spatial cognition being at its lowest means that activities that require precision are not going to be enjoyable at this time or like not preferred at this time for people. So even something like, for example, trail running, if it's like really technical trail running and you're navigating rocks and roots and they're like there's some trail runs that I go on and I can't think about anything else except my steps. Like if you're running up in the presidentials and I'm like, wow, my brain is so tired more than my body because I was just navigating all these like different rocks for 8 hours. That's not the kind of hike that would be best run at that or hike that would be best at this time. Tone it down at this time because like the brain is just going to tire more easily as well. And so what that means is if you're like pushing yourself and overdoing it, it's going to increase your recovery time even more than your body already needs. And the other point I want to make is that the uterus itself is expanding in size and can be up to 3 times the size when it is full with blood. And so if we're thinking about running, so the uterus is a freestanding organ, right? So it's attached, I don't know how I can describe it. It's like attached by ligaments at the top, but the rest is freestanding, right? We know it can rotate and move. So if we think about our ligaments are less juicy, right? They're drier. Our ligaments are drier. If we go on a hard run or a hard workout or even a hard bike ride, we're putting a lot of strain on this very dry ligament and on this very heavy uterus. Like if we're bouncing it around and eventually you might not notice it in a cycle or over a few years, but eventually what that can lead to is uterine prolapse, right? You're weakening those ligaments that are holding up the uterus. This is where we can use these nuances, especially in sport, to support athletes and not harm them. So that's just like a simple example of where like estrogen is found in that fatty tissue, right? And in that ligament tissue. and we have less of it in this luteal phase. So we have to recognize that and honor that through our workouts as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate you explaining it like that. I think I tend to forget about the cognitive piece with certain workouts. As you were describing that, I was thinking about I do a lot of backcountry skiing and primarily just glade skiing, and so there's such a mental piece of that, and I can definitely feel the difference in different phases of my cycle when I'm skiing, but I've always related that just more to energy. So yeah, thank you for explaining that. I wanted to just quickly go back to what you said on the carbs piece, because I think that so often we are pathologizing our carb cravings. Right? And I hear this from women all the time being like, I'm craving all these different foods. And because we're trying to stick ourselves into this 24-hour cycle in some ways, like we talked about, I think that's just such an important piece. I'm really glad you brought that in, that we need carbs during this phase to actually build our lining. So I just wanted to repeat that because I think it's such an important gem there.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I wanted to say, that in general, when we're thinking about the menstrual cycle, like on one level, it's to create life, right? Like it's to create a human. But I'd also say it's a creativity cycle in itself that can be used to create business. It can be used to create systems in your life. It can be used to create any kind of project. And so, what I wanted to highlight in the luteal phase is where we talked about discernment. You know, in the follicular phase, it can be about you've been working on something, you're creating something, where we're in this sort of lower cognitive phase, but discernment is high. It's a really great time to revise and to edit. And if you have, a writing project that you're working on or some kind of art project, and you can take that time to slow down a little bit, but still be working on it in the sense of shifting from doing to more sitting back and reviewing. I think that can be really powerful for the creatives out there, but even beyond creatives, if you're just like creating systems in your life, this is a good time to like sit back and review and have some discernment there. Um,
Yeah, we'll say
yeah,
add to that, Rita.
please.
That's where we can look at the cycle not just for fertility, right? Like
Yes.
this is where it becomes that guide for life, right? Like, we're working with the cycle instead of against it for all of these areas of life and not just fertility. I think that if we, invite the uterus into the conversation in this as part of the creative process, and if you're sitting down to start a project, well, where am I in my cycle right now?
Mm,
How do I feel? What's present for me? That can guide us just as much as guiding us towards pregnancy or fertility. Like it's guiding us in all areas of life. So just highlighting that aspect.
yeah, yeah, definitely worth highlighting that. So maybe I'll bring us back and continue on our cycle here. So if we are in the luteal phase, and if pregnancy does not happen, so if a fertilized egg does not implant, I've come to look at the very ends of the luteal phase where, again, pregnancy does not happen, then progesterone fully dips down, and we start moving into a lower hormone phase. I look at the very ends of that luteal phase as autumn, as fall, as that transition period where we're starting to then go inward, and that is leading us into menstruation, into the bleed, which is really what you can think of as your inner winter. Ayurvedically, we'd think of the menstrual phase as the Vata phase, and Vata is categorized by lightness and roughness and coldness, and so we can see some of these qualities come up during this time. But really, what's happening in that winter phase, how I would describe it briefly, is we really lose that drive to be in the external world. It's really a time that we're designed to go inward and be in our self-reflection phase. It's also a time that we tend to have that lower energy. And I think that's an important thing to honor and recognize, is that from a neurotransmitter chemical standpoint, we just have lower energy during our bleed than we do during other phases of the month. And I think it's really unfortunate that more people aren't in a place where they have more autonomy and can take some time and rest during their bleed. I do believe in a future where we have menstrual leave as a normal part of work. I mean, I know we got to work on actually getting maternity and paternity leave, but like I do see some progressive companies out there who have started offering things like menstrual leave. I think it would make a pretty profound difference to hormonal health in general if women were able to take one day to slow down and rest or work from home to really align with that dip in energy we're experiencing internally during that phase.
Yeah, a lot to say there. Just on that note, it is, it is, it's part of what we were saying at the very beginning, where our culture is a patriarchal dominated culture. And I think this also like brings us into, there's another conversation to be had about the expectations and the cultural impact and the shame associated with someone having menstrual cramps or needing or just simply needing rest. You know, not even having imbalance, just like honoring where they are in their cycle. And to be able to do that, I mean, I when I worked in an office before, it was awful. It's just so much more to think about in how you need to plan your day around trying to support yourself while also going into the office and like being around people and like trying to kind of hold it together where maybe you just need to like cry, like be on the couch and cry. But if we're in a culture where if you express that, you're looked at as being weak and you're looked at as being vulnerable and like it's not accepted as a part of our physiology. And like that's the real harm is that the continued suppression of emotions, of feelings, of I'm feeling this way, but I have to just show up for these other people because like the work pressure or like whatever it is that's on you. And it's just so unnecessary. The world's not going to end in a day. You know, let this person rest.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I also want to be clear. I completely, wholeheartedly agree with every sentiment you just expressed. And I also want to acknowledge one that some people might be listening to that and saying, like, heck yeah, right on, I'm with you. And other people might be listening to this and saying, well, that's extreme. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying when I describe that I think women should have the ability to rest on their menstrual cycle, I'm not saying that I think women are fragile.
Mm.
There's not a fragility that we're talking about here. We're talking about honoring what's chemically happening in the body and supporting your health in a way that you can then be in alignment with that hormonal cascade, allow that hormonal cascade to happen the way that it's supposed to happen. And when that happens, there's this natural effect, again, as we talked about for so many other aspects of health. Like ovulation and having that rhythmic cascade of hormones is so essential for so many aspects of our health, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And I do think a lot of it can come back to if we're pushing through when we're menstruating. I will say personally that learning to rest on my period was such a big game changer in my life because I think I'm someone who has always really struggled with rest in general, and being able to give myself permission to rest. Again, it's like this patriarchal capitalism world that we're in, that all of us have been taught like we need to be producing, we need to be moving. I think that if you're listening to this and that's a new concept for you to rest on your period, and it's also hard for you to rest in general, resting on your bleed is such a beautiful introduction to learning how to rest. To be able to say, like, okay, once a month, this one day or 2 days, or, maybe give yourself 4 hours, right? Like, if that's where you can start with. And I think if you don't have the autonomy to shift that around your work, it doesn't even have to exactly align, like, with your cycle. I mean, it's beautiful if it does, but maybe you get your bleed on Tuesday and like that Sunday you're like, okay, I'm going to like bank myself some rest here and honor like the very end of my luteal phase. I don't know. I, on one hand, like very much want to recognize that so many people don't have the opportunity to do so. And that does not mean that we just fall into a mindset of like, well, it is the way it is, right? Like, let's change that. Let's have these conversations. Let's get into positions where we can change that.
Yeah, 100,000% agree with all of that. And I'm really glad you said that. The fragility piece is so key here, where it shouldn't even be a part of the conversation. Like, that's not even like remotely what it's about. And just as you're describing, it's honoring the cycle of nature and where we're at. And again, that looks different for each person. You know, I have had conversations with women that say they have the most energy when they're on their bleed.
Hmm.
And when I hear that, I also get curious, just as you're describing, right? Like, is this someone that knows how to rest? Like, is this someone that invites that in? Or is this like a forced, restriction that, oh, I don't need to rest on my period? So I just think like curiosity around these conversations is really key because it can be so individual in how people experience this. My cycle is going to look so different from your cycle and like everyone else I talk to. So it's not like, oh, mine is this on this day and yours is this on this day. And when I menstruate, this is what I do. So this is what you should do too. It's all nuance, right? Because like rest to me might be taking a bath. Rest to you might be a little bit of yoga, right? Like a kapha person might feel better getting some things moving,
Yeah.
like a little gentle vinyasa. Whereas like a vata person, and we'll get more into this in another episode, I think, but a vata person might need to just like lay out on the couch for
Yeah.
like 3 days. And that's what they need. So it is very individual in what that word rest means for people if we are honoring that cycle within it. Yeah. It's
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing I want to talk about, specifically in the menstrual phase, is emotions. So we've already alluded to a bit of really breaking away from this way we've been taught to think about our emotions, specifically emotions connected to our hormones, where the other thing that really can break my heart is I'll hear women say like, "Oh, I'm just crazy because I'm on my bleed." Right? I've said that myself like dozens of times in my life. And I get why we feel that way because goodness gracious, I am doing a Dawson's Creek rewatch, which I just admitted to many people for
wow.
some reason.
That's
Yeah,
a
I know
throwback.
that's the whole thing, right? I never watched it, so I say rewatch. Anyway, I digress. Um, I was sitting on the couch with Bryce watching it the other day. He's going to be upset. I just admitted to people that he's rewatching Dawson's Creek with me. But I was crying, right, while we were watching an episode, and he was laughing at me, and I was kind of laughing too. And so this happens. We all experience this increase in emotions. That could be sadness, it could be anger, it could be, all these different things. And I think it's so important when we're talking about the menstrual cycle. I've come to understand that in a couple of different ways. So, one, because hormonally, like our hormones are at their lowest, we're not having that prefrontal cortex involvement. We're not having this like cognitive experience when we're on our bleed. So when we experience an emotion, when we're on our menstrual cycle, we're experiencing that emotion fully and in a really raw way, in a way that we aren't having that cognitive buffer. It's the difference between having that emotion and then like thinking through it versus just like having that emotion and feeling it, right? And the other part of that is when it happens when you're not watching Dawson Creek reruns, but just in general in your life, I think that oftentimes, if I have a cycle that I feel a lot of sadness and grief, to me, it oftentimes is a reflection of like, oh, like I'm carrying some sadness and some grief this month. And now that I'm in this place hormonally, like I'm really fully feeling that. Or, if I have a cycle where I'm feeling some anger, it's like, okay, like I'm carrying some anger in this month. And let me reflect on that and not pathologize that, but just recognize that at this point in the hormonal cascade, we're feeling that more fully because of how we don't have that cushion, that cognitive buffer that we typically have at different phases.
Yeah. And yeah, I love that how you said that because it also highlights if we're slowing down or not, right? And if we kind of just like push through those emotions and just kind of chalk it up to, oh, well, I'm stressed at work or like this is going on and just kind of write it off. But if we're not slowing down or taking the time to reflect on that, we're just going to keep powering through and move in a direction that is not aligned for us. And it's not aligned for our purpose and it's not aligned with who we are as a person and our values. So I think there is this like this larger perspective to offer in this phase of slowing down and, taking that time to yourself and turning inward, right? And wintering.
Yeah.
And that's really the point of it is to be able to connect with yourself on this more macrocosm level and like how you're moving through the world.
Yeah.
Well, because if we're experiencing those emotions that are so intense, like how has this just been building up? And well, if we're not slowing down to even notice them around ovulation or other times of the month, like throughout the cycle, they kind of compile and then they kind of burst into these extremes of, anger or a fight with your spouse or you have road rage or like these other areas that we can also very easily write off as like, well, that person's an asshole or like it's just it compiles and there is a way to like slow down and reflect and get curious about it. And I think that's what the wintering piece, really highlights.
Yeah. You mentioned journaling earlier. One of my favorite menstrual practices is I journal when I'm on my bleed. And I have this specific journal that I only use when I'm on my bleed. And it helps because I've always gone back and forth on like being able to be consistent with journaling, but I can commit to like once a month. I pull out this journal. I think of it as like, okay, let me reflect on this past month. Let me reflect on these past 28 days and physically, mentally, emotionally reflecting there, also with where I'm at currently in my bleed. And it's a nice place to also, if you're new to cycle tracking and that piece, like even just that as your one time a month to sit down with a journal, I think can be really supportive. So I just wanted to offer that.
I love that. I think I read that in your newsletter a few months ago and it really stuck with me because like for me, if I'm journaling every day, it just falls off the radar. So having more space around journaling and intention within journaling feels more aligned with how I move, and how I kind of structure my day or my time. And it feels more approachable as opposed to like setting myself up for failure. Like, oh, another day I didn't journal. Like it just feels more spacious and generous and gentle too,
Yeah.
which I really like.
Yeah. Well, great. I'm
Yeah,
glad that that landed.
it did. Yeah.
Um so I think the last piece in terms of the menstrual phase is, did we talk about exercise in that phase? I don't think we fully did yet.
No, I guess we've like kind of dabbled with it just in the rest piece, but to add to that specifically with, exercise, I do think that can look different for different people, and really just honoring where you're at with it, not trying to force anything, I guess would be like the place to start, right? Like not
Mm,
forcing it, like removing expectation, just really being present in how you feel, I think is a vital piece of honoring the rest that you need. Um, but in this phase, like to get more specific, if we're thinking about the body, it's releasing, right? It's moving energy and like that energetic shift can feel very powerful for some people and maybe more subtle for others, but really like avoiding extreme situations like with lifestyle and with exercise, right? So this is not the time for hit training, this is not the time for strength training, this isn't even really the time for endurance. Like this is the time to recover and rest. And so, if it means going for a walk, that's great, but it really is like releasing expectation of what you're trying to achieve, right? It's like taking achievement off the table. And going back to your point a little while ago, like I think if you're someone that's not used to that, it takes time to ease into it. So be gentle in that process because I've worked with clients that we're working on how to slow down. And I've had them like one I've been working with the last like 6 months or so. And she's like, when we first met, I didn't know how to slow down. I never knew that was a thing. And now she's like, I love yin yoga. Like, it's amazing. And it's life changing how to really just shift that mindset and how you're approaching it. But also just to highlight with the extremes, you're really, you don't want to add on temperature changes like saunas, cold plunges. Like, that is not the time for this. I mean, that's not something I typically recommend for people anyways. There's a lot of nuance to that and when it's appropriate and when it's not. But speaking in context of this conversation, avoiding anything extreme, like something that's going to increase your internal temperature or like starkly decrease it very quickly or rapidly. So being mindful, like if it's in the winter and you're going outside, like keep yourself bundled up and not go out without a hat on. Like, don't give your body, basically, don't make your body do any more work than it needs to do because it's already working so hard to move that energy and move that blood. And I know that some like lifestyle pieces in there too, and not just exercise, but I think it really is important to think about in however exercise means to you, but it's like scaling back and shifting that expectation. Because we also, like, with the body temperature dropping, right, your body is also trying to re-regulate itself. And that's a huge energetic shift, right? So making sure you're hydrated to allow those fluids to move, making sure you're eating balanced meals like khichdi is excellent if you're on your menstrual cycle. You have protein, you have carbs, you have vegetables. Like, it's easy, it's gentle. Put it in the crock pot, it's there all day. You don't have to think about it. So it's one less thing like cognitively that I have to worry about cooking. Like, take it off your shoulders, like take the pressure off and just make it as simple as possible. But get in that nutrition to support it. Make sure you're supporting your digestion, have some tea that feels helpful and gentle and easy. So really that's the approach because there is like your ability to burn carbs shifts a little bit too, right? Because we're moving out of that high carb need going back in towards that follicular phase where carbs are used differently. So the whole body's in transition, which is vata, right? Like we're in vata. So the softer and gentler we can be in vata season, in winter season, the more prepared we are for juicing the body back up in the next phase. And I will say, maybe we'll get into this more in the next one when we get into like imbalances. But I will say I started having healthy cycles and balanced cycles and pain-free cycles when I really started honoring where I was in my cycle relative to exercise. Because I would always try and keep up with my husband or keep up with my friends or keep up with someone else. And I was like, well, they're doing it. I want to get out and do it. And I want to go do this. John and I started calling it our monthly menstrual marathons. And I'm not even kidding. Like, I would run, 20 miles like a couple days before bleeding and like was having really painful cycles. So for me, I really started to feel healthy when I shifted and moved with my cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we should do a whole episode on how to care for yourself during your menstrual cycle and get into that in more detail. But maybe I'll just summarize what you said there. And when we think about the Vata season and the winter season, the themes that we want to go for are warmth. Just wanted to like really highlight that. Like you mentioned khichdi and tea, like warm foods, cooked foods, warm teas, warm clothing, like loose, comfortable clothing, because like you said earlier, the uterus, that area is a little bit larger. So like, let's get some looser pants so we're comfortable in that phase. And yeah, comfort, coziness, right? Those all things that we think of as winter.
Yeah.
So yeah. And again, we're doing that in order to honor where we are in that phase and also to support our body in going into the next cycle.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
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 Awesome.
Well, this was fun. Is there anything that we missed that you wanted to highlight?
I think we certainly have a lot to talk about in the next episode.
Yeah.
I was kind of refraining from like going down any rabbit holes of imbalances. But I think that would be really helpful to highlight next moving forward is what imbalances can look like, different types of menstrual cycles related to constitution. I think there's a lot to help understand. So, maybe I'll just summarize that by saying, after kind of taking in all this information that we just shared, really being gentle in processing it. The theme really is awareness. And not trying to fit into a box or fit into a structure or a standard. But it is awareness of you as an individual, how you feel today, not 5 years from now, not a year from now, not 5 years ago, right? You are who you are today, and honoring that and trusting that you are exactly where you need to be in this journey of discovering your menstrual cycle.
Yeah. End it there. I think that's a good way to close. And maybe I'll just say, I know we have a couple fun ones planned, like you said, talking about imbalances coming up. I like the idea of doing a how to care for yourself on your bleed. But will just call out that we do have, if you're interested in supporting our podcast, we have a Patreon, which is $5 a month. And in that, you will get some bonus episodes, but you also have the Q&A option. So if there are specific things that you want us to talk about, if there's certain areas you want us to dive deeper in, that's a great place that you can send that information along to us, and we can customize this to be more what you're looking for and what you need. So.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Love to hear from folks. And I think it also, in the community chat, it allows other people to be seen and acknowledged in what they experience and what they feel. So that's also part of it. Even if you don't have a question for the podcast, we invite open conversation to bring people into this conversation. And with that, we do have a lot of tools already to support menstruation, different phases of the cycle in the wellness library. So hop in there, more to be added for sure. But it's a good place to start if you're looking for the next take action step for learning.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm even just thinking off the bat, we have one on some yoga poses during the menstrual phase. We have castor oil packs in there. We have different tea recipes in there. Lots of things I can think that would be really supportive for hormonal health. So absolutely.
Yeah. Cool.
Good.
Thank you, Rita.
Thank you, Brittni. This was fun.
This was awesome. Yeah. If you enjoyed today's episode, it would mean the world to us and help support our work if you'd like, share, leave a review, as well as subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you use. If you're looking for more connection or would like to support this podcast, we'd love to have you join our Patreon for $5 a month. Here you'll get bonus episodes and access to our community chat Q&A.
And don't forget to check out our wellness library, which is filled with self-guided classes, kitchen tutorials, herbal recipes, and more Ayurvedic practices, all for just $5 a month. Thanks so much for being here with us. Until next time, be well.